So we will get started, and I just want to give a couple thank yous to folks at Mass Peace Action, Cole Harrison, Amar Ahmad, and Raishin Liu, who are helping us out to make this event possible. I also want to thank Jody Evans at CODEPINK for founding the China's Not Our Enemy campaign. And I want to thank co-sponsors that we have for this event. Thank you so much to Chow Collective. Please check out their research and their work. Veterans for Peace East Bay and Veterans for Peace, the China Working Group, who've been great partners to us in our coalition, working to end and dismantle US aggression towards China and promote peace between the nations. So check out those links in the chat for more from our co-sponsors and more ways to promote peace with China. So I'm just gonna go right into it, and I think we will have more opportunity to speak more about what we're doing with these campaigns to mobilize folks in the movement to create a peaceful Pacific from the west to the east. We'll be sharing some actions, including voting, asking your senators to vote no on the NDAA, the Pentagon budget, which is record high. There's talks to increase it to 780 billion this year. And as well, we will also have an action that'll be shared related to this topic of Taiwan, calling for Representative Elaine Luria in Virginia to stop advocating for an expansion of President Biden's war powers over China and Taiwan. She recently wrote an op-ed calling for the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act, which would expand Biden's authority to go to war without congressional approval. So let's get into some of the context around that very issue. I'm very excited to announce and introduce Carl Zha, who's a Chinese-American independent political analyst, and he is the creator and host of the podcast called Silk and Steel about China, the Silk Road, history, culture, and geopolitics. You can find Carl and Silk and Steel podcast on Twitter, YouTube, and Patreon. And we'll be linking to his podcast, Silk and Steel's recent series on the history of Taiwan. It's a very long and comprehensive series. So if you don't feel like we got deep enough into that tonight, it's a great place to go after this to seek more information so you can find out what your views are after having all the facts in front of you. That series is also with Xiangyu, and just want to acknowledge that Xiangyu is Taiwanese, so you can get into some opinions from someone who has, deep ties to the region of Taiwan. So thank you so much for being here today, Carl, with CODEPINK and Mass Peace Action. And Carl's gonna present for a little bit, and then afterwards, we will go into some further questions. So if you have a specific question for Carl, we may have time for it. I'm gonna be asking questions first, and we'll see if we have time. Feel free to ask those though, and engage in the chat. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Madison, and thank you for the organizer of CODEPINK for inviting me to speak. I will share my screen now. I did prepare a slide for this. Can everybody see my screen? So this is, I'm first going to present a brief history of Taiwan, just to provide the historical context, hopefully with more nuance than the John Oliver piece. I have 60 slides, so I will go very quickly. So first, location of Taiwan. Taiwan is located about 100 miles off the coast of mainland China, southwest of Okinawa, north of the Philippines. Taiwan has been inhabited since Paleolithic age, and around 5,000 years ago, the Austronesian farmers from mainland China start to arrive. And this is a possible migration route from where foxtail, millet, and rice cultivation happened in mainland China. These farmers made their way down the coast, and they made it to Taiwan about 5,000 years ago. And from Taiwan, the Austronesian farmers brought their language and culture and spread it all throughout maritime Southeast Asia, as far as Polynesia, Hawaii, Eastern Island, New Zealand, and as far as Madagascar off the coast of Africa. Taiwan historical records. During the Three Kingdoms period of China, the Wu Kingdom sent an expedition to a large island called Yizhou. Then early 7th century, the Sui dynasty sent an expedition to Liuqiu Island. Then in 1292, the Yuan dynasty sent an expedition to Liuqiu Island. So traditional interpretation is that Yizhou, Liuqiu all refer to Taiwan, although there's some disagree and think it actually refer to Okinawa. But by 9th century, the Han Chinese fishermen start to settle in Penghu Islands in the Taiwan Strait, very close to Taiwan. And then in 1281, after the failed Mongol invasion of Japan, the Kublai Khan had his fleet setting up shop on the Penghu Island and officially set up administration. So from Yuan Dynasty, Penghu Island, this is the location of Penghu Islands. You can see it's very close to Taiwan already. From Yuan Dynasty, Penghu Islands was officially listed as part of China. Then in 1620s, in the late Ming Dynasty, the Europeans start to show up. The Dutch wanted to forcibly open China for trade. So they start by occupying the Penghu archipelagos, but the Ming sent a fleet to kick out the Dutch. So the Dutch was forced to flee to Taiwan and set up shop there. Just another note that start from at least from Yuan Dynasty, Han Chinese fishermen start to go across to Taiwan to fish around the waters around Taiwan. The Chinese traders start to trade with indigenous people on Taiwan, and the Han Chinese pirates start setting up their base on the Taiwan island because it's outside the imperial control. When the Dutch came to Taiwan, they set up their fort at Fort Zeelandia, and from there they start to subjugate indigenous people on Taiwan. And the Spanish didn't want to be left behind, so they set up their own colony in the northern Taiwan around, the present-day Taipei area. But after 20 years, the Dutch waged a war against the Spanish, kicked them out, and by that time, by 1640s, Dutch control almost all the coastal areas of Taiwan. But of course, that left the vast interior of Taiwan is still under the indigenous control. This is a painting of the Dutch Fort Zeelandia on Taiwan. This is it's built on a sandbar called Taiwan, and Taiwan is from the indigenous name given to the sandbar. But eventually, the name Taiwan will expand to include the whole island. So Taiwan is actually an indigenous name as opposed to Formosa, because Formosa was a Portuguese name given to the island in the 16th century. After the Dutch arrived, they set out to expand their colony. Because it was too expensive to bring European colonists to Taiwan, they settled on bringing mass migration of Han Chinese migrant farmer into Taiwan. This is an 18th century painting of a sugar plantation on Taiwan. In fact, the Dutch famously said, Taiwan is a land of milk and honey, and the Chinese are the worker bees. And in fact, the Dutch exploitation of these Chinese migrant labor was so harsh, it sparked several rebellions by the Chinese migrants on the island, and the Dutch brutally put them down with multiple massacres until this man showed up. And this is Koxinga, aka Zheng Chenggong. He's a son of a Chinese pirate and his Japanese wife. When his dad was still a roving pirate basing off of Japan. But then his dad went back to China, surrendered to the Ming Dynasty, and became a Ming general. So at age of 8, Zheng Chenggong went to China to receive a proper Confucian education. And then the Ming Dynasty collapsed. So in 1640s, the Manchus breached the Great Wall and start conquering all of China. Zheng Chenggong's father, a Ming commander, defected to the Qing government, but Zheng Chenggong decided to remain loyal to the Ming cause. And from his base along the Chinese coast, he launched his resistance against the Qing rule. At one point, he even sailed into the Yangtze River and almost took over the city of Nanjing. But eventually he was defeated, and he realized he needed a base a secure base against the Qing. So he's cast his eyes at the Dutch colony of Taiwan, where Dutch already brought over tens of thousands of Chinese migrants. And so in 1661, Zheng Chenggong brought over 25,000 troops with him and besieged the Dutch in Taiwan. This is after a year of siege, the Dutch surrendered to Koxinga. This is a Dutch painting of their surrender on Taiwan to the Ming loyalist General Koxinga. This is a modern Chinese painting of Dutch surrender on Taiwan. After taking over Taiwan, Zheng Chenggong wanted to move to the Philippines and kick the Spanish out of Manila, but he died that year. But before he died, he sent the order to execute one of his most capable generals, Silang. So Silang then escaped across the Taiwan Strait and surrendered to the Qing dynasty. After Zheng Chenggong died, his son Zheng Jin ruled the island for about 20 years. But after 20 years, the defector general Silang had his revenge. He led the Qing force across the Taiwan Strait and conquered Taiwan for the Qing dynasty. And that happened in 1682. And that's about 100 years before the founding of the United States. This is a paint map of Taiwan in the 19th century. So after the Qing dynasty took over, the Han settlement expanded on Taiwan. And they took over the fertile plains on the east coast of Taiwan. But on the west coast of Taiwan, the east part of Taiwan, the mountainous part, was still under the control of the indigenous people. In fact, under the Qing government, the Qing official pursue a segregationist policy because they don't want the mixing of the different ethnicities to cause ethnic conflict, and then they have to send in the military to put down rebellions. So on mainland China, that means the Han Chinese are forbidden to migrate into Mongolia, to Manchuria, to southern Xinjiang, where the Uyghur Muslims live. And on Taiwan, the Han Chinese were forbidden to move into the indigenous people's territory. And this lasted until the end of Qing rule. There's a famous line called Tu Liu Xian, or Tu Liu line, that Qing government put in place that forbids the Han settlers from crossing. And then the Americans would show up in 1850s. This is Commodore Perry leading his black ship to forcibly open Japan and also the Luchu Kingdom on Okinawa for trade. This is a Japanese woodblock painting of Perry. And this is a Japanese woodblock painting of Perry's black ship. Perry actually stopped by Taiwan on his second trip, and he realized Taiwan's strategic importance as a midway transshipment point in the East Asian trade. So Perry sent a note he suggested to the United States government that US should annex Taiwan. But his proposal was ignored because US was busy with other things. A few years later, US would be in a very bloody civil war. But after the Civil War, the Americans are back. So after 1860s, the end of Second Opium War, China was forced to legalize opium trade and threw open all the coastal ports to foreign traders, including the ports on Taiwan. In 1867, American merchant ship Rover sailed from the port of eastern Guangdong, Santou, to Yingkou in Manchuria, but on the way got blown off the course and shipwrecked off the coast of Taiwan. The survivors who made it ashore were promptly massacred by the indigenous people for trespassing. And then the American consul at Xiamen, China, Charles Legendre, went to the Qing government demanding compensation and punishment of the indigenous people. But the Qing official, being typical bureaucrat, said, well, these people are savages. They're beyond the pale of civilization. There's nothing I can do. So Americans took that as excuse to take matter into their own hands. They sent in the Marines. US Marines landed on the island, but they were ambushed and defeated by the indigenous people on Taiwan. So the next point, the American consul in Xiamen, Charles Legendre, went back to the Qing government. He went to the Fujian governor, and he threatened that US will take military action against China if nothing was done. So he strung on the Qing governor to give him a battalion of Chinese soldiers. He went to Taiwan. He went to this area. This is the most southern tip of Taiwan, the Pink area that was under indigenous control. And he forced the indigenous chief to sign a treaty to put up a lighthouse and to agree that any Western sailors that come ashore waving a red flag, as a sign of distress, indigenous people will promise not to massacre them. And to the east of Taiwan is Luchu Island chain, or the traditionally Luchu Kingdom with capital on Okinawa. This Luchu Kingdom has been the tributary state to China since Ming Dynasty, but then the Satsuma clan of Japan subjugated Luchu Kingdom because Japan was forbidden to trade with China directly. And by subjugating Luchu Kingdom, they found a backdoor way to trade with China. So essentially, Luchu Island became dual vassal of China and Japan for a long time. But Japan, after 1860s Meiji Restoration, the Japanese centralized its government, abolished feudal domains, and they wanted to annex Luchu Kingdom outright. And they found their excuse in 1871 when Luchu sailors who were coming back from Okinawa after a trade mission to send the tribute to the Okinawa king, to the Luchu king. On the way back, they were blown off the course and shipwrecked in Taiwan at the same place where the American ship Rover shipwrecked several years before. The survivors again were massacred by the indigenous people. A few survivors escaped. They ran to the Qing authorities on Taiwan, and the Qing authority fed them, clothed them, and sent them back to Luchu Islands. And they thought the matter was closed, but Japan didn't think so, because Japan demanded that Qing pay compensation on the reason that Luchu Kingdom is now a protectorate under Japan. They demanded Qing government pay compensation and also punish the indigenous people who did the massacring. Again, the Qing official said, these are just savages. They're beyond the pale of civilization. Nothing I can do. And then the Japan used as excuse to launch its own invasion of Taiwan. This time, Japan was helped by the Americans who participated in the previous invasion of Taiwan. The former American consul to Xiamen, Charles Legendre, became advisor to the Japanese government. He plotted and planned the whole Japanese invasion of Taiwan. James Robert Watson of U.S. Army, Douglas Castle of U.S. Navy, who participated in the previous U.S. expedition to Taiwan, became advisor to the Imperial Japanese Army. So this is a Japanese woodblock painting of the Imperial Japanese Army basically massacring the indigenous people on Taiwan. And the Qing government obviously didn't want Japanese troops on the island, so they asked the British to mediate. And in the end, the Qing agreed to pay Japanese compensation and also to compensate Japan for the cost of their expedition. The British ambassador to Japan at the time said China basically pay for the privilege of being invaded. But Japan got what it wanted. Mostly it's the implicit recognition by Qing that Luchu Kingdom is indeed under Japan protection. So Japan then moved to annex Luchu Kingdom on Okinawa. This is a picture of Japanese imperial troops posted outside the royal palace, the Shuri Castle in Okinawa. And they turned the Luchu Kingdom on Okinawa into Okinawa Prefecture. And then in the Sino-French War of 1884 and 1885, the French Navy attacked the Penghu Islands, and they also landed troops on Taiwan. And that made the Qing government finally realize the strategic importance of Taiwan. So after the conclusion of Sino-French War in 1885, the Qing officially upgraded Taiwan from mere a prefecture of Fujian province to its own province. So Taiwan was made into a province in 1885. But 10 years later, first Sino-Japanese War happened. This is a woodblock painting of the Japanese Imperial Navy sinking the Qing fleet in the Battle of Yellow Sea. As a result of China's defeat, Japan forced the Qing government to cede Taiwan to Japan. But that's not what the people on Taiwan want. They want to be Chinese subject. They don't want to be Japanese subject. So they decided to declare independence. They declared the Formosa Republic. And this is the flag of the Formosa Republic, the tiger flag. And the Qing governor on Taiwan became the first president of Formosa Republic. And this is a newspaper illustration published in Taiwan at the time, illustrating the declaration of Formosa Republic. Their calendar year is named Yongqing, which literally means forever Qing in Chinese, which shows their loyalty to China. They just didn't want to be Japanese subjects. So Japan actually had to fight another war of conquest. They landed their army on Taiwan and fought a series of battles against mostly local Hakka militias, but their power is overwhelming, and they eventually took over Taiwan in 1895. And this is a painting of Japanese Imperial Army marching into the Straits of Taipei in 1895. Thus began the 50-year colonial rule of Japan on the island. Now, the Japan didn't just subjugate all the Han settlements on the western Taiwan. Japan also subjugated the indigenous people in the eastern mountains. In fact, this led to a lot of resistance. Most famously in 1930s, the Wuse incident, when the indigenous people rose against the Japanese colonial rule, but they were brutally put down. The Japanese Air Force dropped mustard gas on the indigenous communities. So eventually by 1930s, all of Taiwan Island had been subjugated by Japan. And Japan started the Japanization program, the so-called Kominka movement. Komin literally means emperor subject in Japanese. And to be a komin, to be a loyal emperor subject, you have to give up your Chinese name, you have to adopt a Japanese name, and you have to perform a Shinto ceremony where you renounce your Chinese ancestor and adopt a fake Japanese ancestor. Now, keep in mind, out of the whole population of Taiwan, only 2% of the Taiwan population actually went through the whole process and became a full-fledged komin. And these 2% are usually match the landed elite, the landlord class on Taiwan who collaborated with the Japanese. Among the Japanese collaborator family is that family of the former Taiwan leader Li Denghui. His brother volunteered for the Japanese Imperial Navy and died in the Battle of Manila against Americans. And he himself volunteered to be an anti-aircraft gunner for the Imperial Japanese Army in Taiwan, because by 1945, American Air Force started to bomb Japanese occupied Taiwan from airbase on mainland China. And everyone on Taiwan also are forced to learn Japanese. And this ended in 1945 after the Japanese surrender. This is the day when Japan was restored back to China, according to the Cairo Potsdam Declaration. The KMT landed on Taiwan with American support. The problem is that KMT government at this time was incredibly corrupt, which actually the civil war will break out soon on mainland China. When the KMT landed, a lot of the assets on Taiwan are owned by the Japanese colonial authorities. So the KMT carpetbagger officials came in. They confiscated the Japanese colonial properties, but they turned them into their own personal assets. And because of the civil war breaking out mainland China, KMT increased taxation. The inflation was rampant. And so this created a lot of discontent on the Taiwan island itself. This all come ahead on February 28th, 1947, when a KMT tax collector beat up a 40-year-old woman for selling unlicensed cigarettes. And when the crowd protested, the KMT shoot into the crowd. And this sparked a general uprising on the island against the KMT rule. This famous painting was painted by a left-wing artist from my hometown of Chongqing on mainland China. And for this painting, he was arrested and executed in 1951 for spreading pro-communist propaganda. And this is a picture of the riot that ensued. There was a general uprising on the island. Then the founder of the Taiwan Communist Party, Xie Xuehong, led the only organized armed resistance against KMT. She actually formed a guerrilla against the KMT, but the KMT shipped troops from mainland, and eventually the uprising was crushed, and Xie Xuehong had to flee to mainland China. This begins what's known as a White Terror era in Taiwan. So anyone can be accused of being a communist sympathizer and be jailed and executed. This is a picture of two women who work at the Taiwan post office. they were accused on the Trump up charges of becoming a spy. And one woman, Ding Yaotao, she was already pregnant at the time of her arrest. So her daughter was born and raised in prison. And 2 years later, both of these women were executed. And this was the environment in Taiwan at the time. And this was all fully supported by the United States, especially after the outbreak of Korean War. This is a picture of US Army officers training and equipping the KMT military on Taiwan. And of course, after 1949, KMT was fully defeated on Taiwan, and all the KMT troops came. The KMT was fully defeated on mainland China, and all the KMT troops now pulling to Taiwan with support of the Americans. And U.S. 7th Fleet, President Truman authorized 7th Fleet to sail into the Taiwan Strait to prevent the Chinese People's Liberation Army from crossing the Taiwan Strait, from liberating the Taiwan island. This is June 1950, so it's 4 months before the Chinese involvement in the Korean War, and this already happened. This is General MacArthur on Taiwan on August 1950. This is Chiang Kai-shek in the background, the leader of KMT. Here's Vice President Richard Nixon presenting a picture of President Eisenhower to Chiang Kai-shek on Taiwan in 1950s. And also during the Korean War, the U.S. set up the so-called Air Defense Identification Zones, short ADIZ, for Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Now, ADIZ has no basis in international law. It's unilaterally declared and includes a lot of the international airspace, because each country's sovereign airspace is only limited to 12 nautical miles off its coast. But the American declared ADIZ zone include a lot of international airspace. And look at the ADIZ in Korea. It stretches over North Korea and almost go up to Pyongyang. And then there's the famous Taiwan ADIZ zone. You can see half of it is over mainland China. And the recent news you hear about Chinese incursion into the Taiwan airspace, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about Chinese aircraft flying over this American declared ADIZ zone. And I will talk about that later. And US also placed 12 Matador nuclear-capable missiles in Taiwan in 1957, and later deployed a nuclear weapon on Taiwan aimed at mainland China. And in 1958, during the Taiwan Strait crisis, when it looks like PRC was poised to take over these offshore islands that's still controlled by the KMT, US military suggested to use nuclear weapon against mainland China, because they realized there's no way to stop a conventional takeover of these islands. So they recommended using nuclear weapon against the airfields on China. If that doesn't stop the PRC, they recommended to launch nuclear weapon deep into mainland China. And they also realized, this is revealed in a recent Daniel Ellsberg leak. They also realized there's a possibility that Soviet Union might do a retaliation by striking Taiwan and Okinawa with nuclear weapons. But American planners decided that's a price they're willing to take. They're willing to save Taiwan, even if that means that Taiwan gets nuked. They're okay with that. Look, it's the President Eisenhower visiting Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek in 1960. American troop level in Taiwan rose to 30,000 during the Vietnam War. Now, this is an infamous Time magazine Christmas in Vietnam special on the U.S. military R&R, aka sex tourism in East Asia, from the issue of December 22nd, 1967, featuring Taiwan. So during the Japanese colonial rule on Taiwan, the Imperial Japanese Army set up these women-attended baths in Taiwan to serve the Japanese. But after the Imperial Japanese Army left, the KMT repurposed these establishment to serve the American GIs. So, it was openly touted in the page of Time magazine. You can find it in the Time vault. And this is a kind of the state of Taiwan was in. Now, the KMT misrule actually led to the sparked independence movement because KMT precluded unification with mainland China with the help of US, killed off all the communists and leftist opposition. Joining Red China is no longer an option. The opposition to KMT then turned toward advocating Taiwan independence because KMT is a Chinese nationalist party that insisted on its rights to rule all of China, including Taiwan. And KMT mismanagement of the interethnic relations. Most people on pre-1945 Taiwan, I'm talking about the most Han Chinese people, originally came from the Fujian province across the strait, and they mostly speak Minnan language. The newcomer that came with KMT with a retreat from mainland, they came from all over China and speak different languages. And the KMT depended on the military that it brought over from mainland China for control. And but because the KMT control every aspect of Taiwan society, and because KMT is essentially a mainlander party, so mainlanders occupy most of the leadership positions. And KMT also started to force to impose standard Mandarin language on Taiwan. Now, anybody who caught speaking standard Mandarin in Taiwan schools were beaten. Okay, I grew up in 1980s China in Chongqing. At the time, we speak standard Mandarin in class, but during the recession, we speak our own dialect. Nobody bothered us. But in Taiwan, it was different. In Taiwan, this was very, very coerced language program. So this all led to the resentment of so-called Bensenden or the Taiwan provincials against the KMT rule. Now, come 1971, United Nations held a vote. So up to 1971, Chiang Kai-shek regime on Taiwan presented itself as sole legitimate ruler of all of China. But in 1971, majority of the countries in United Nations voted in the People's Republic of China and voted out Chiang Kai-shek's regime from the United Nations Security Council. And the following year, Nixon visited China. And that's when US issues a joint Shanghai communique, which states the United States acknowledged that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there's but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States government does not challenge this position, reaffirms the interest of the peaceful settlement of Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. So this is important because back when it was issued, most of the people on Taiwan still identify as Chinese, right? So it says all Chinese on the either side of Taiwan Strait. In response, as the US normalized its ties with China, US Congress put forth the Taiwan Relation Act because, for a long time, US Congress had this so-called China lobby, which backed the Chiang Kai-shek regime, including the owner of Time Life media empire, Henry Luce. So these congressmen put up the Taiwan Relation Act, which US is supposed to assist Taiwan in maintaining its self-defense capability in effort of determine future of Taiwan by other than peaceful means. Any effort of determining future Taiwan other than peaceful means would be of great concern to the United States. So this Taiwan Relation Act actually does not oblige US to the defense of Taiwan. It just says US should help Taiwan with self-defense. What this actually translated to in reality is every year, US sell all these outdated, expensive weapons to Taiwan. That basically helps to feed the military-industrial complex back home. Then Taiwan enters the Jiang Jingguo era after the death of Chiang Kai-shek in 1975. Now, Jiang Jingguo is a more enlightened dictator compared to his dad. He was sent to study in Soviet Union in 1920s, and that's where he met and married his wife. In fact, when he was studying in Moscow, he met Deng Xiaoping, and two became close friends. When KMT came to Taiwan, they started land reform, which they couldn't do in mainland China because back in mainland China, KMT's support base is a landlord class. But on Taiwan, the KMT support base is the KMT army, and they're not obligated to the Taiwan land-owning class. So they actually carry out land reform. And under Jiang Jingguo's rule, Taiwan started to take off economically. And toward the end of his rule in 1987, Jiang Jingguo finally ended the martial law, ending the White Terror era of Taiwan. So before 1987, it's illegal to form any political party on Taiwan. Only legal political party is a KMT. So that was ended in 1987, and all the censorship were relaxed. But Jiang Jingguo died the following year in 1988, and that paved way for the Taiwan democratization process. Now, Jiang Jingguo also recognized that there's no hope for KMT to take back mainland China, that in order to stay in Taiwan long term, he need to incorporate the locals, the Taiwan locals into his administration. So he promoted a whole bunch of Taiwan locals into the KMT ranks. And one of them is his successor, Li Denghui. And so both Li Denghui and the current Taiwan leader, Tsai Ing-wen, were the Taiwan locals who joined the KMT administration. And under Li Denghui, finally, an election was held in 1996. Now, keep in mind, the democratization of Taiwan almost happened simultaneously with the democratization process happening in South Korea, and both being basically US-backed right-wing military dictatorship. There's a reason for that, because in the late 80s, early 90s, that's the winding down of the Cold War. US can no longer justify supporting right-wing dictatorship. Well, and not that with a straight face. US still do that, but it's increasingly harder to justify. So the democratization process on Taiwan and South Korea actually confer an extra level of legitimacy to the continued support of US to these governments. And next thing, in 1992, the representative from mainland China and Taiwan actually met in Hong Kong, and this became the basis of what's so-called 92 consensus. So 92 consensus says there's only one China. But from Taiwan side, they take it to mean there's one China, but different interpretations. Whether that China is People's Republic of China or Republic of China, that is open to interpretation. On the mainland side, their interpretation is there's only one China. And in fact, the Xi Jinping and Ma Ying-jeou met in Singapore in 2015, and Xi Jinping has stated publicly, as long as 1992 consensus and its core values are acknowledged, we stand ready to have contact. Even in 2015, Taiwan leader Ma Ying-jeou still affirmed the adherence to 1992 consensus, which is there's only one China. Okay, now the fun part, the most recent hype tension in the media about the Chinese aggression. So I took a screenshot from the John Oliver video of showing the PLA aircraft intruding over Taiwan's ADIA zone. So I'm surprised it actually pictures the Taiwan ADIA zone to show you how ridiculous it is. Half of it is over mainland China. And the second of all, they actually mapped out the PLA aircraft flight path. This is pink line right here. As you can see, it's as far as Taiwan Island itself as possible. I mean, you argue this is still closer to mainland Chinese coast than it's to Taiwan. And certainly, this area is international airspace. Taiwan has no jurisdiction over this. At best, what China is doing is what is the equivalent of U.S. Freedom of Navigation Patrol. This would be the Chinese equivalent of the freedom of flight freedom. Sorry, too much acronym. I actually saw. I followed the Twitter of Taiwan Defense Ministry. They actually tweeted out, on daily basis of flight paths of PLA aircraft. So this happened on November 17th. So either yesterday or a couple of days ago, depending on your time zone. And you can see this is the actual flight path of the PLA aircraft. This little red arrow right here. It's so far from Taiwan. I mean, so why? And Xi Jinping gave a speech recently during the 100-year anniversary of 1911 Chinese Revolution, he actually said, okay, so I went to YouTube and I took the Guardian. I went to the Guardian channel to take the Guardian translation, because you guys are not going to believe me if I take the Chinese state media version. So according to the Guardian translation of the Xi Jinping speech, you can still find it on YouTube. Just type Xi Jinping Taiwan speech. And Xi Jinping said this: reunification through a peaceful manner is the most in line with the overall interest of the Chinese nation, including Taiwan compatriots. And of course, this got spin in the Western media to Xi Jinping reiterate the pledge to swallow up Taiwan. So why hype up the tensions? Well, on the side of Taiwan, for the Taiwan politicians, the fear-mongering actually win votes. The current Taiwan leader, Tsai Ing-wen's approval rating was in the single digits before her last re-election. The fear-mongering about the PRC during the Hong Kong protests actually helped her to win the election. So any hyping the cross the strait tensions will help her party to win elections. This is if anybody still pretend Taiwan is not an appendage of the U.S. empire, here's Tsai Ing-wen's congratulation tweet to Donald Trump on his presidency. Democracy is what ties Taiwan and U.S. together. Look forward to advance our friendship and partnership. Congratulations, Donald Trump. And then in 2020, during our latest election, there was a widespread panic in Taiwan because a lot of these separatists, they were so pro-Trump. They went all in on Trump. There was a panic among the pro-Trump citizens when Trump lost the election on Taiwan. This is an article from Newsweek on November. Taiwan president urged calm as pro-Trump citizen panic amid Biden vote surges. So yeah, okay. Now, why the reason for U.S. to hype up tension? The U.S. national security establishment, U.S.-China tension is used for justify near $1 trillion defense budget. I know we're not exactly $1 trillion yet, but it's their goal to get there. We get this ridiculous headline like the Coast Guard is vital to defend Taiwan against China. They're not talking about Taiwan Coast Guard. They're talking about U.S. Coast Guard. Okay, so the grift is so ridiculous that it's so transparent. And again, U.S. spent $13 billion to build the USS Ford aircraft carrier, and U.S. is planned. Sorry, I used my own tweet. U.S. is planning to build 10 of these, right? And what healthcare? They don't care about healthcare. Okay, so this wraps up my talk. I tried to make it brief to leave time for a question maybe from Madison, so we can make it more interactive. And thank you for allowing me time for do this presentation.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you so much for those slides, images and maps, and for that rapid pace, comprehensive summary of history and the layers of colonization in Taiwan, which is really tragic and should not be taken lightly, especially the Japanese colonial era, which was very violent and brutal. That was super helpful breakdown. So let's see, and I see we have some lively discussion in the chat. Thank you all for offering your opinions. So I wanted to follow up with a couple things. You talk about, let's see, so you mentioned John Oliver. And so for folks who aren't aware, there's a recent segment that John Oliver decided to do on Taiwan, on the issue of Taiwan and status and recognition of Taiwan as a nation or not, which he acknowledges that the UN and the WHO don't generally acknowledge Taiwan as a nation, even in the segment. But it was a big deal that he addressed it. And so kind of following everything you talked about, why do you think there is this sudden intense fixation on Taiwan, especially from the West, especially from the US State Department and mainstream media right now. And what does John Oliver leave out of his popular piece? You mentioned how there is a bit of lacking nuance, and he actually uses up so much more time and speaks even slower than you, but he still manages to leave out some nuance. So yeah.
So I actually did a reaction video to the John Oliver segment with Taiwanese communist rapper Xiangyu. Xiangyu actually dug out the people who actually did the research for John Oliver's piece, and they're like your think tankers. One of them, Jessica Drong, works for the Project 2049, which is an American U.S. neocon think tank. One of them, James Lee, I think he is literally on the payroll of the Taiwan government, and so this is like who, I mean, and the whole bunch of NED adjacent organizations. So these are the source of John Oliver piece. But to address your question, why the recent tension? I think it's still a lot of one thing that he failed to address is to present it as a Chinese aggression toward Taiwan, but distract from the bigger picture. I already talked about his presentation of the massive Chinese flight over the Taiwan ADIA zone. What gets to mention is that was a response to the to the U.S. 7th Fleet with a combined fleet of Japan, Australia, UK. They sailed a huge armada through Bashi Channel between Taiwan and Philippines and into South China Sea to perform military exercise in South China Sea. That's what China was responding to. It wasn't even a message to Taiwan. It was a message to United States, because I think the Chinese leader understand correctly that the cross-strait relation is really between U.S. is really a matter of U.S.-China relations. And at this point, people say, oh, what about Taiwan? Unfortunately, right now Taiwan don't have too much to say, because all we hear is the side we hear from the U.S. State Department or the press release from the Pentagon, and for them it's useful to present this as U.S. is defending the freedom of Taiwan people from the Chinese communists, like they have been saying since 1950s. But what we all know, U.S. don't really care about human rights of people in other countries. What we do know is that U.S. finds this as a wedge point to increase the U.S.-China tensions, to continually funneling increasing funds into the U.S. military industrial complex. U.S. Navy wants to have a 355 warship Navy. I think right now they're up to 300. They still want to build 55 more warships. These are the things that for them to justify the budget increase. So this is why we cannot have healthcare or better infrastructure in this country, because we need to spend all these gazillions of dollars to quote unquote defending Taiwan. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and in terms of, the US's history as a military power and an imperial power, we know there's extensive genocide, but even currently, as you spoke a bit about the Ryukyu Kingdom and Okinawa. So currently our tax dollars are being spent building a dangerous base in Henoko Bay in Okinawa. So we are also putting the Israeli Defense Dome in Guam right now, and raising carbon sequestering forests in places like Guam and the Northern Marianas. So
people in Okinawa, people in Okinawa don't want American military there. They have made it clear in the last 50 years that the majority of people on Okinawa want the U.S. military out. So all these pretensions, we are there to protect our Asian allies because our Asian allies want us there. This is a lie. Okinawan people don't want US military on the island. Now, some people say, oh, but Japan want the US there. Well, that's because Japan kind of treat the people of Okinawa as second-class citizens, and they didn't want the US military base on their Japanese main island, so they stick the US Marine base on Okinawa. And as I mentioned a little bit about the history of Okinawa, used to be its own independent kingdom, and it has never been treated by a government of Japan as an equal part of their territory. So yeah.
Right, and we have Colonel Ann Wright was here. She's one of our partners and volunteers, and she also mentioned Jeju Island and similar history of anti-communist exterminations and such. Yeah, thank you. And also the framing of China as uniquely aggressive or more aggressive than the US, when the US is across the world with warships doing joint exercises daily. And if you want like simple evidence of this as a US citizen, go ahead and check on the websites or the social media of any of our Indo-Pacific Command, our Navy, our Air Force, our military, our Marines. And they're just bragging about these joint force exercises they're doing, including with past imperial nations like Japan, the UK, Canada, and using the hashtags like lethality and joint force lethality. So this is happening, and the aggression is being led by the US.
Yeah, I asked my friends who live in Taiwan. They said, oh, everything is normal. Life goes on, whereas in US, when all our information comes from these propaganda mainstream media channel, everybody thinks China is launching imminent invasion of Taiwan. That is not happening. Okay. For those of you who want to see that, I'm sorry. Liberation of Taiwan is not going to happen anytime soon. There's no pending Chinese invasion of Taiwan. That's just not in the cards. Like for pure practical reason, for any kind of operation to take place, there will be a huge mass of troops on the Chinese coast that could easily be spotted by the satellites. So there's no pending invasion of Taiwan. Let me just be clear about that. And right now, there's a U.S. has an interest to hype up these maneuvers as a super aggressive Chinese move to feed the military industrial grift at home.
And the fixation in the media and government here in the US, in the West, it also aligns with the US military leaving Afghanistan and having less of a foothold on that border of China to, quote, contain China. So the timeliness of this fixation is also important to consider. Is there any peace movement on the ground that you know of in Taiwan? Is there any domestic dissent or opposition to Taiwan's mass spending on US weapons? Recently, there was a $750 million arms sale that we uplifted, educated on, and tried to oppose at CODEPINK, howitzers and pretty sophisticated equipment, actually, that goes in opposition to the three communiques agreement to not sell sophisticated weapons. Also, just generally Taiwan's increasing reliance on US military involvement and US troops being on Taiwanese soil.
I don't think there's currently any organized movement, but for people who understand Chinese, I highly recommend you go on YouTube and Google these street interviews that conducted on streets of Taipei. So Taiwan people are asked about their views on the usefulness of this US weaponry, and almost all of them says these weapons are useless, but all agree this is a price they have to pay for some sort of American help. So it's essentially protection money. Everybody understand these high budget, high price items are outdated. It's not actually useful. It's just something they have to keep feeding the U.S. military industrial complex to keep U.S. happy, so they take Taiwan's side. So that's kind of the overvailing public opinions on the street.
Yeah, the disclosure that troops have been in Taiwan, U.S. troops, for over a year. Some people have been assuming that for a while, but the public disclosure was not not welcome by Beijing, definitely. And in many ways, the US military causes devastation and violence for anyone on bases that are overseas, like economic deprivation, violence from accidents, contamination like PFAS chemicals, military crimes, etc. I also want to bring up, you talked about indigeneity in Taiwan, and we hear a lot of misconceptions, misinterpretations. We hear different narratives. It can be pretty confusing for just the average Western citizen trying to support the right thing. Can you speak to how these misconceptions or misunderstandings become entrenched, where that begins, particularly in the present day? And are there any parallels to how revisionist history gets taught elsewhere, like in the US?
The main backers of Taiwan separatist movement are not the Taiwan indigenous people. Let me put it that out there. They are the Han Chinese on Taiwan, which now consists of almost 98% of the Taiwan population. The 2% of the indigenous people on Taiwan has traditionally been marginalized, and that has been the case. And there's no when you hear media talking about native Taiwanese defending independence, they're not talking about indigenous Taiwan people demanding their island back. They're talking about the Han Chinese people on Taiwan who came to Taiwan, whose ancestor came to Taiwan before 1945. That's so there is a difference there. And it's so yeah. In fact, I didn't want to go too much into detail about Taiwan domestic politics because I don't know how much of the interest is to the American audience, but I did cover that extensively with my talk with Xiangyu on my podcast, the Taiwan History Series. So right now, Taiwan has two parties, just like US, like two-party system. Taiwan has DPP and the KMT. The KMT still nominally pay lip service to like one China principle, and whereas DPP is normally seen as a pro-independence party. Now, the indigenous people on Taiwan vote overwhelmingly for KMT, and why? I think one person told Xiangyu that at least the KMT has a decency to buy votes from us. The DPP does nothing for us. I mean, it's very it's a very practical way approach. But so that's people need to realize when the American media is saying native Taiwanese demanding independence, they're not talking about the indigenous Austronesian people who have been living on the islands for thousands of years.
Thank you. Let's see. We have a question from Cole at Mass Peace Action, and I'll add a little to it. He's wondering, what is the United States right now has the Innovation and Competition Act. It's a bill in the Senate. They recently were trying to push it through in the defense NDAA Pentagon budget. Right now, they're really trying to push it through. Pelosi's trying to take it to conference without having a bill in the House. Its companion bill was supposed to be the Eagle Act, which we've been opposing at Mass Peace Action and CODEPINK, and it hasn't been put to a vote. So in some sense, somebody is hearing some opposition, whether within the House or from the public. But the bill has to do with many things. It's huge. But one thing I want to point out to specify, it has military funding for the Asia Pacific. It has provisions for more joint force exercises with the US allies like the Quad. It has anti-China propaganda, mass funding, like 500 million for Radio Free Asia, outlets like that. The US Global Agency for Media has McCarthyist provisions about surveilling Chinese students and researchers. And then it has a lot of funding for science and research, including microchips. So there's the Taiwan connection. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, let me talk about the semiconductors. So even John Oliver talked about semiconductors. So Taiwan manufacture most of the world's semiconductor, and during the Donald Trump administration, Trump forbid Taiwan to export semiconductors to mainland Chinese companies such as Huawei, and because of this because now they're posing this as China might invade Taiwan because they need semiconductors. Well, they need semiconductors because Trump forbid Taiwan from selling semiconductors to mainland China. And now there's a shortage of semiconductor worldwide. Why? Because Trump also, US also placed sanction on semiconductor manufacturers on mainland China. So any company that has any US business are forbidden to purchase semiconductor from mainland China. So that means GM, a US company, a GM in China making cars for the Chinese market, they are not allowed to purchase chips from the indigenous Chinese semiconductor manufacturer to put in cars as they sell in China. So this is in a way kind of artificially created semiconductor shortage by the U.S. policy. U.S. policy certainly made it a lot worse. And U.S. also demanded that the Taiwan semiconductors will hand over their trade secret to the U.S. They demanded a technology transfer, and the Taiwan semiconductor complied. And this is to say that how can that this is a kind of the fate of being a U.S. colony. You don't have sovereignty. If U.S. wants something from you, you have to submit. Whether that means you have to pay for expensive, useless, high-tech weapons, or it means you have to hand over trade secrets.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a side of things that there's so many elements to the US and Western hybrid war on China. The science and tech side is one element, and that's how the Biden administration and Congress are also justifying domestic spending, which in some ways is good. We do want some domestic spending for infrastructure and research, but it's being justified just like military spending by this inflated threat of China. Everything has to be done in opposition to the falsely inflated, falsely constructed expansionist China, which it doesn't actually have these kinds of intentions that are placed onto it.
I included in my slides the meetings between the mainland and Taiwan representatives for talks is because there has always been talks between the two sides, and there's an ongoing conversation, but U.S. is inserting itself into this conversation between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, and why is a U.S. business like I just saw a ridiculous article today. Someone say, "Oh, Taiwan is not ready to defend itself. We're so frustrated. Why Taiwan is not spending more money on its military? Why they're not It's so frustrating for U.S. that Taiwan is not ready to defend itself." It's like, it's none of U.S. business. I mean, like, are you really proposing we're going to have to defend Taiwan to the last Americans, to the last drop of Americans? I mean, that's just a ridiculous proposition. I mean, there's so many things we can focus here at home. We can focus on developing U.S. We can focus on fixing the broken infrastructure. We can fixing on the providing universal health care. But right now, there's no money for it because all the money goes on to feed our military. And we have to make up all kind of bogus reasons like this Taiwan threat. Definitely.
The Pentagon budget is so overblown and is just draining resources from life-affirming services that could be going to U.S. citizens. Instead, we're just hell-bent on maintaining a war economy in terms of our government and the Biden administration and the military-industrial complex. I want to ask also, let's see. This is a question from Charles Hsu of Chow Collective. Chow Collective is one of our co-sponsors for this webinar. He says, I'm also curious how the Japanese colonial era is remembered in Taiwan among Hakka versus indigenous people, and whether that tracks with attitudes regarding independence.
Oh, brother. Okay. So I think the short answer is the KMT has mismanaged Taiwan so much that made the people in Taiwan feeling nostalgia for the Japanese colonial era. So the one of the reason is because Japanese colonial rule has become so a distant memory by now, whereas the KMT misrule is fairly recent, right? It's after 1945. And so people kind of pose this kind of false dichotomy between, oh, at least life were better than KMT in the Japanese colonial era, which is kind of selective reading of history. But this is kind of the contradiction on the island itself. Yes, definitely, it definitely tracks the kind of pro-separatist, pro-independence sentiment on Taiwan. And what happened, after the Taiwan's democratization process is that, the decade of anti-communist propaganda on Taiwan island itself combined that the kind of the distaste for the KMT rule, because KMT were seen as, oh, these are the outsiders that come from mainland China. These are mainlanders, combined with that the anti-communist propaganda about mainland China, and that kind of foster a kind of very distorted view of mainland China among, I think, many Taiwan youth. It's unfortunate, and that's what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah, there's a lot of unfortunate trauma and internal divisions that come with that kind of the layers of colonization.
But I also like to point out, since lifting of, so 1987 is when Taiwan finally lifted restriction on people going visit family on mainland. And in 2000 is when they agreed to direct communication between Taiwan and China. Before 2000, for a Taiwan businessman to go to China, go to Shanghai, they have to first fly to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong fly to Shanghai, because there's no direct flights. So after 2000, the restriction finally lifted on the Taiwan side. So now they can go back and forth. And now there's an estimate somewhere between 1.5 million to 2 million Taiwan people living, studying, working on mainland China. So there are cross-communication, cross-strait communication at the grassroots level happening as we speak.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, the Korean Peninsula and the forced separation of families there from the border created by US interference, the war that is still ongoing that we're calling generally for at CODEPINK, and I think also at Mass Peace Action for an end to that US war and intervention. And yeah, even my own grandfather, he's 92, he recalls how there were indigenous people in Taiwan prior to the KMT, prior to Japanese colonization, prior to everything, and the divisions created by U.S. interventionism. He has compared it to South Vietnam and South Korea as well. Let's see. I think we'll just do one more question. I know we're over the hour, but I wanted to leave some room for audience questions. So thank you so much for being here, Carl. My last question is just opening it up to what possibilities do you see for regional stability, mutual cooperation, and what globally we refer in the international community and such as maintaining the status quo, including strategic ambiguity that's kept peace in the region between the US and China and the island of Taiwan. And including nuclear disarmament, because we know that the US is one of the only powers to have threatened, well, it's the only power to have dropped an atomic bomb on Japan, and it almost had a nuclear airstrike on China during the Taiwan Strait crisis. So what possibilities do you see for maintaining a mutual trust and cooperation?
Yeah, US only pulled out its nuclear weapon out of Taiwan in 1974. And right now, I think it's my hope, more a kind of wish that China-Taiwan relation can maybe at least go back to like 2010s level when things are less heated. And keep in mind that from the PRC side, the PRC rhetoric has been pretty consistent over the years. They want peaceful reunification. So I don't think there's any impending invasion of Taiwan by the PLA anytime soon. I think the mainland China is fine with the status quo unless they move, separatists on the island to move to declare formal independence. And I don't think the government on Taiwan will do that either, because the DPP has been in power several times on Taiwan. They never moved toward actually go ahead and declare independence as is their party platform, because they correctly understand, just as like Chinese US military understand, that's while it's useful to manufacturing tension, for their own political gain, but it's no fun when if actually everything, the false of cards falling down. So that's why Tsai Ing-wen, the current leader, said, "Oh, we don't need to declare independence because we're already independent." So she is kind of backpedaling in that regard. So I don't think there will be a war in Taiwan. But I do wish for increased economic engagement, at least economic engagement. I think everybody can agree on, because right now, I think 40% of the Taiwan economy is depending on trade with the mainland China. So the two sides are already economically very much integrated. But you just need to get U.S. out of the picture. The U.S. ban on the semiconductor export from Taiwan to mainland, that's totally ridiculous. It's like, why does U.S. get to dictate what does Taiwanese company do to sell to customers on mainland? That's crazy. But that's what U.S. do, because U.S. is a world hegemon. I think there will be a lot more room for cooperation between the two sides if the U.S. stop encouraging certain elements on Taiwan for stirring up tensions. Because let's face it, Taiwan is still very much a client state of United States. I mean, government on Taiwan won't do anything without explicit approval and backing of United States government. So again, it goes back to U.S. So I see some encouraging signs, because the recent Xi-Biden summit, where Biden again reiterate the U.S. will abide by the one China policy, and U.S. will not support Taiwan independence. I see that as a positive sign, because Biden has said that let's make sure our competition not veer into conflict. It's actually interesting to contrast the opening speech given by Xi and Biden, because Xi actually said, both American and Chinese people want us to work together in friendship and cooperation. What Biden actually said was, we need to make sure our competition does not veer into conflict, just straight and fair competition. So he's still stressing the competition part. And I think Biden is speaking to his domestic audience. He doesn't want people to label him as a panda hugger or Beijing Biden. And and at the same time, he did recognize we need to cool off the tensions. We need to cool off the rhetoric, so it doesn't actually go into a hot war, which benefits nobody. But again, I don't think the U.S. Deep state is going to give up on the competition aspect, because that's what will continue to provide the $1 trillion grift for the military, for the intelligence services, for all the arms manufacturers. So it's unfortunate, but I think for the left wing people, for the people leaning on the left on the U.S., we should focus on. What we can focus is on anti-imperialism. We should be anti-interventionism. U.S. has no business to interfere in the affairs of other countries. Nobody elected us to do it. Nobody elected Biden to, nobody on mainland China or nobody on Taiwan elected Biden, right? I mean, so what does U.S. have the right to speak for the people outside of its borders? And there's plenty of problems in U.S. and we need our energy to focus on, building a better, more justice society here at home. And I think that's like a baseline we can all agree on, and then build the common alliance.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great, and totally agree about economic cooperation. And I think it's Arto in the chat has also mentioned the influence of also right-wing Taiwanese backed media in the US. So this relationship kind of going both ways, the idea of like neo-colonial collaboration and such. And I think it's also worth re-emphasizing that US weapons and services and troops won't actually protect Taiwan, won't actually save and preserve the safety of Taiwan in the case of war. US military interventions also don't ever make human rights improve, especially not human rights or infrastructure or the environment during this climate catastrophe. It never improves any of those things, while US citizens at home suffer from a lack of services and resources. Thanks again, Carl, and thanks to Mass Peace Action and our co-sponsors. Please check out Carl's extensive podcast, which is on YouTube, on the history of Taiwan. And please follow Mass Peace Action and the CODEPINK China is Not Our Enemy campaign as we build the movement to counter and dismantle US aggression and the US hybrid war on China, to promote a future for people, peace, the planet, and for everyone in the future. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Madison. Thank you for the organizers of CODEPINK for inviting me to speak. I felt honored. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carl, for putting our background on right before, and from calling all the way from Bali, Indonesia, early in the morning for him.